Welcome to this special broadcast on SABC2 for the medium-term budget policy statement given by the Finance Minister round about this time every year. It usually serves as purely as an update on how the budgeting process is going as announced in the February budget, and usually gives a small indication of what might change in the next February budget, but that's hardly ever the case. However, this year we may have a different story on our hands altogether. Behind me you can see the National Assembly. People are gathering and sitting down. Let's have a look inside whilst we just reflect on the background of this year's medium-term budget policy statement. It's been turbulent. We've had economic downgrades across the globe, economic outlooks across the globe also becoming murkier and murkier. Uncertainty rules the world economy, including South Africa. In the meantime, we've had to contend with strike action, which unfortunately has been rather violent this year and widespread. Also, we've had some failures in government administration. For instance, in the education department, there have been a few issues. And also, a few municipalities that have been brought to heel. Government has also had its credit rating downgraded by some of the global ratings agencies who are becoming concerned a bit about how the environment is beginning to affect our fiscus and government's ability to manage its financial commitments and its budget projections. We've heard from our economists earlier on that the deficit for the budget is expected to grow a little bit. We had a 4.6% estimate for this fiscal year when the budget was announced in February. That's likely to be revised to a slightly worse number. One thing is certain, economic growth forecasts are definitely going to be downgraded. We've seen Treasury come out on one or two occasions this year downgrading the expectation that was announced in February. And yes, there we have it. The baton is coming in and people are getting ready for the Finance Minister to make his speech. So let's cross to the National Assembly straight away.
There will now be an opportunity for a silent prayer or meditation. Thank you. Please be seated. Order. Honorable members, I wish to acknowledge the presence in the gallery of Mr. Jean-Claude Kibala, the Minister of Public Function in the Democratic Republic of Congo. You are welcome. Also, on behalf of the House, I wish all Muslims here at home and abroad very good Eid Mubarak. The Secretary will read the first, second and third orders together.
Medium-term budget policy statement. Introduction, Adjustments Appropriation Bill. Introduction, Taxation Laws Amendment Bill.
The Honorable Minister of Finance.
Deputy Speaker, Mr. President, Mr. Deputy President, fellow Cabinet colleagues and Deputy Ministers, Governor of the Reserve Bank, Ms. Marcus, the MECs for Finance, mayors of the bigger, members of the Diplomatic Corps, Directors General, heads of the finance institutions, honorable members, ladies and gentlemen. I have the honor to present the fourth medium-term budget policy statement of President Zuma's administration. A year ago, Mr. President, we drew attention to your statement of intent, and I quote, "We want to have a country where millions more South Africans have decent employment opportunities, which has a modern infrastructure, a vibrant economy, and where the quality of life is high." End of quote. This builds on our Constitution, which commits us to improve the quality of life of all citizens and free the potential of each person. Mr. President, 20 years ago, our country was truly in a crisis. We're not in a crisis now. The CODESA negotiations had broken down. Rising conflict threatened to overwhelm the prospect for a peaceful transition. In that bleak hour, the ANC's Ready to Govern document provided hope when it said, and I quote, "The achievement of a genuine sense of national unity depends on all of us working together to overcome the inequalities created by apartheid. A broad, inclusive approach, free of arrogance and complexes of superiority or inferiority, is fundamental. We have to rely on the wisdom, life experiences, talents, and know-how of all South Africans, women and men. There can be no apartheid in finding solutions to the problems created by apartheid." End of quote. In the 2 decades since those words were written, we have made substantial progress in meeting basic needs, in building our economy, and in constructing a non-racial democracy. Income per capita has risen by over 30% since 1994. Employment has increased by 4 million. Access to housing, electricity, water, and sanitation has doubled. Enrollment in higher education has increased by 400,000. And a new and vibrant set of democratic institutions have been established. But the journey has not been easy, and our progress has been uneven. We have been through 2 economic recessions. Inequality and unemployment are still deeply entrenched. Skills development is not adequately meeting the needs of our industry. Service delivery has failed in some communities, and local government has faltered. In the words of the National Development Plan, and I quote, "To accelerate progress, deepen democracy, and build a more inclusive society, South Africa must translate political emancipation into economic well-being for all. It is up to all South Africans to fix the future starting today." End of quote. The events of recent months have highlighted these inadequacies. We have witnessed a crisis of labor relations in the mining sector with tragic consequences in Marikana. We have seen mismanagement of supplies to schools and hospitals in some provinces. Moody's and Standard & Poor's have seen fit to downgrade their ratings of our ability to service debt, inappropriately in our view. These events are a cause for urgent reflection. There are lessons to be learned, there are mistakes to be acknowledged, and corrective steps to be taken by all constituencies. Above all, it is time for action, collective action. During the past month, the President convened a leadership summit in recognition of the depth of the challenge and the need for government, business, labor, and community to find joint solutions. There is agreement that greater impetus must be given to the mining charter and other sectoral initiatives as part of an employment-focused economic framework that establishes a shared responsibility for improving the living conditions of working people. A conference arranged by the PICC has reviewed details of 18 proposed strategic infrastructure programs. These initiatives build on the current 845 billion rand construction program that is in progress. They will accelerate energy, transport, water, and housing investment, open up mining and industrial opportunities, and give greater impetus to building economic linkages across Southern Africa. Strategic infrastructure programs represent large and long-term fiscal commitments. The budget provides for part of the funding required, and the state enterprises are making substantial investments in their areas of responsibility. We are exploring options for boosting infrastructure funding through enhancing the role of development finance institutions and mobilization of private sector capacity. In government, we are forthrightly confronting our difficulties. We assure our people that we will repair dysfunctional municipalities. We will try harder to connect book suppliers to schools, and we will work with business and labor to create decent living conditions in mining communities. We will restore confidence in labor market institutions and act to combat violence and lawlessness. And as we have done for the last 2 decades, we will support inclusive growth and improve access to social services through a transparent, disciplined, and sustainable allocation of public resources. I am sure that all South Africans will identify with this intent and agree that our country is a better place than it was in 1994. Yet we still have to work harder to achieve economic well-being for all South Africans. This is a long-term project. Every step of the way, we will do our utmost to broaden public service delivery and expand participation in our economy. Deputy Speaker, in crafting this budget policy statement and our fiscal strategy for the next 3 years, Cabinet, guided by the Ministers' Committee on the Budget, took cognizance of the following factors. The global economy is slowing down. Recovery after deep recessions takes several years. The European situation does not inspire confidence. Economic growth in South Africa has slowed to just 2.5% this year, held back by both global uncertainty and disruptions to domestic production. Revenue collection is expected to be 5 billion rands less this year than the February estimate. The budget deficit is projected to be 4.8% of GDP in the current year as a consequence. For the MTEF period ahead, public expenditure will remain at the level set in the 2012 budget. Let me repeat that. Public expenditure will remain at the level set in the 2012 budget, in keeping with sound fiscal guidelines. There will be no additions to the overall spending level of government. Debt will peak at 39% of GDP in 2015-2016. Just for the skeptics amongst us, 39%. Not the 90% of European countries, or the 200% of Japan, or the 120% of Italy, 39%. Strong measures are being taken to ensure value for money in public spending, including more effective controls over personnel expenditure. We have again put every effort into finding savings, eliminating waste, and reprioritizing spending towards key social and development objectives. Over the MTEF period, 40 billion rands in spending has been reprioritized. Further shifts in composition of expenditure are being made towards infrastructure investment, economic competitiveness, education, and healthcare. Rigorous procurement reforms are being planned across the whole of government, especially in infrastructure project management, to strengthen service delivery, eliminate waste, and root out corruption. We must confront the shortcomings in our systems, but we should not be dismayed by the contradictions and complexity of development. Transformation processes are dynamic. As long as there is a collective and uncompromising political will, buttressed by an equally strong intent and commitment by all of us, we will overcome the challenges before us. We are in this growth and development project together: business, government, workers, citizens. If we are to reduce poverty, raise investment, and create sustainable jobs, then we have to act jointly on the strength of a shared strategy and common goals. And so the National Planning Commission rightly identifies a wide range of initiatives and critical actions. It indicates that development has never been a linear process. It requires a multidimensional framework in which rising living standards are built on a combination of increasing employment, productivity growth, and expanded social wage and good quality public services. There are many other initiatives which give practical content to the National Development Plan and are highlighted in the President's Leadership Summit program. Strengthening municipal finances and investing in urban infrastructure. The Industrial Policy Action Plan and promotion of special economic zones for industrial and export opportunities. Accelerating the creation of youth employment opportunities. Improving living conditions in informal settlements, including mining communities. Expanding exports, especially to emerging markets, and realizing investment opportunities in Africa. Agricultural support, investment in rural areas, and small business development are but some. The great challenge of addressing inequality, Deputy Speaker, is about all of these activities, but it is especially about the expansion of work opportunities and the progressive extension of the social wage. Deputy Speaker, it is instructive to recall that our public infrastructure and administration, our laws, policies and programs, our schools, hospitals and social services, which we finance through our budget, are the everyday realities of the life we share as South Africans. And so our budget planning is at the very heart of how we care for this common good. This is what the medium-term budget policy statement is about. Before turning to the framework for the 2013 budget, honourable members, let me outline progress on some of the key initiatives announced previously. Tax incentives for large manufacturing projects amounting to 7 billion rands have been approved since 2010, which will support investment amounting to 28 billion rands. The Manufacturing Competitiveness Enhancement Program was initiated in June this year, and 144 applications have been received with a value of 1.8 billion rands. This is part of the 25 billion rands economic support package announced in last year's MTBPS, which also includes allocations to strengthen training in agriculture, support for mineral beneficiation technology, and a Northern Cape semi-precious gemstone project. We have initiated an independent power procurement program. The required financial concurrence for the 28 renewable energy projects approved by the Minister of Energy has now been finalized. The Jobs Fund has allocated 1.8 billion rands to 39 projects in its first round of proposals. The Industrial Development Corporation is also actively supporting many projects and investing billions in businesses aligned to the growth path. The Treasury is establishing a Chief Procurement Officer. The preparatory work has been done, drawing on international best practice, and key appointments will be announced before the end of the year. The Municipal Infrastructure Support Agency has been established and has assessed the capacity requirements of 92 municipalities and deployed 67 technical experts. The City Support Program is now underway in Buffalo City, Nelson Mandela Bay, Tshwane and eThekwini. To improve oversight of our financial sector, we will shortly announce plans on implementation of the new Twin Peaks regulatory framework and will table legislation next year. As we continue to bring plans and programs to fruition, they will be reflected in the medium-term framework, which provides financial resources, gives authority to spend, and links appropriations to projects and service delivery targets. Our budget process has to take into account that we cannot do everything at once, and the economic outlook sets limits to what we can afford over the period ahead. Deputy Speaker, the global economy, as I said earlier, is weak and seems likely to remain so for at least a few more years. So what is our economic outlook? The IMF expects global growth to be about 3.3% in 2012 and highlights uncertainty about growth prospects in Europe and the United States. Economic growth in developed countries will remain below 1.5% this year and next, while developing countries will grow between 5 and 6%. Economic activity in the euro area, which is South Africa's most important export destination, is expected to contract by 0.4% this year and grow just 0.2% in 2013. This gives us some idea of the global climate in which we are trying to survive as an economy and as a people. Growth has slowed in China and India. This has affected the South African economy through lower commodity prices and slower growth in trade. While central banks in Europe, the United States, and Japan have announced measures to expand liquidity and keep interest rates low, this has not fully offset the growth-reducing impact of austerity measures and private sector deleveraging. Volatility in financial markets has contributed to unpredictability in the value of the rand exchange rate. But there are still fast-growing economies in the world, and especially in Africa. Opportunities in sub-Saharan Africa have benefited many South African mining, manufacturing, retail, and other companies. The Southern African Development Community is currently South Africa's second largest export market after the EU, and is growing particularly rapidly as a destination for manufactured exports. These include steel, chemical products, machinery and appliances, and especially equipment used in mining. Deputy Speaker, the outlook for the South African economy, on the other hand, is as follows. As I indicated earlier, we expect growth of about 2.5% instead of the 2.7%, and down from just over 3% in 2011. Gross fixed capital formation will increase by about 5% this year, mainly driven by public sector capital spending. Business confidence remains weak, and private sector investment growth is subdued. Consumer price inflation for September 2012 was 5.5%. Headline inflation is expected to stay within the 3 to 6% inflation target band for a period, but could go over it as well. Export volumes contracted at an annual rate of 6% in the second quarter of 2012, after falling by 1.5% in the first quarter. Import volumes are now almost 4% above pre-crisis highs, while exports are still well below their peak, contributing to the widening current account deficit, which basically means we are importing more into South Africa than we are exporting out of South Africa. As the global economy recovers, we expect to see South Africa's growth improve over the next few years. Real GDP growth of 3% is forecast for 2013, rising to 4.1% in 2015. Factors that will contribute to an improved medium-term performance, including expanded public sector infrastructure investment, new electricity generating capacity, and strong regional growth. A substantial accumulation of cash in the corporate sector is available to finance stronger investment once confidence and growth prospects recover. The macroeconomic and fiscal stability we have achieved in 1994 is a strong foundation on which to build. We need to focus clearly on intensified implementation of plans and programs signaled in the new growth path and associated sector development strategies. It's in this context that we can now say to you, what is our fiscal framework? Deputy Speaker, the budget framework Cabinet presents today aims to achieve an appropriate balance between fiscal consolidation over the medium term and continuing support for economic recovery. In the uncertain global economic conditions we face, government has taken a number of tough decisions. As I mentioned earlier, No additional expenditure is proposed for the baseline set out above the baseline set out in the 2012 budget. This means that expenditure growth in real terms is limited to a rate of 2.9% a year over the next 3 years. Additional resources to support the economy will be generated from efficiency gains, savings, and reprioritization. As revenue recovers alongside economic growth, the budget deficit will narrow from 4.8% in the current year to 3.1% of GDP in 2015-2016. Unless all of you pay more tax, then we can reduce it faster. Do we have a deal? I'll be waiting for volunteers after the speech. Government debt will be stabilized. I said volunteers. Government debt will be stabilized at about 39% of GDP in 2015-16. South Africa's fiscal response to the global economic crisis has been amongst the strongest in the world. Government spending expanded from 28% to 34% of GDP in the wake of the recession. Our deficit widened by 6% of GDP between 2007 and 2011. We were able to sustain spending programs even as revenue fell, partly because of our fiscal position before the crisis was so healthy. We have added more than R1 trillion to government's debt because of the recession, but we will pay that debt. Despite the size of the fiscal stimulus, reinforced by accommodative monetary policy, South Africa's economic recovery has been tepid. Investment, trade, employment growth have remained hesitant. Part of the explanation is the weakness of the global recovery. But we also have to look at ourselves. We have to ask what reforms we can implement to give greater impetus to investment, business development, and job creation. As COSATU's General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi recently said, and I quote, "We want investment opportunities to flow in our direction. We don't want our country to be presented as a chaotic place where there is no rule of law, where dog eats dog, where the mode of operation is survival of the fittest." End of quote. Our deficit will be reduced over the period ahead, but ours will not definitely be a path of fiscal austerity. We will continue to expand infrastructure investment. We will continue to broaden the social wage. We will continue to encourage a revival of investment in productive activity. Expenditure continues to grow in real terms. We have succeeded in realizing savings and reallocating resources amounting to, as I said earlier, 40 billion rands. Our fiscal policy stance enhances counter-cyclicality, sustainability, and intergenerational fairness. Because the economic recovery is slower than anticipated, the budget deficit will be reduced more gradually. In this way, the fiscus plays the part in ensuring that the recovery gains greater momentum over the period ahead, while ensuring that the public debt remains sustainable. To repeat, ours is a sound and sustainable fiscal position. What is our revenue situation? Deputy Speaker, this month SARS celebrates its 15th anniversary. Since its establishment as an integrated and independent tax and customs administration in October 1997 by Minister Manuel, SARS has collected 6.1 trillion rands at an average annual growth of over 11%. The revenue target has been revised marginally downwards by 5 billion rands to 821.4 billion rands for the 2012-13 year due to slower than anticipated growth. To date, SARS has collected 402 billion rands and is on track to meet this revised target. The consolidated revenue estimate for this year, that is the tax revenue and other revenue that the state gets, is 901 billion rands, or 7.6% more than the 2011-12 outcome. Payments to our South African Customs Union partners increased from 22 billion last year to 42 billion this year, and are projected to go up to 44 billion rands next year. These are the contributions we make to the SACU countries. The consolidated revenue projection for next year is 986 billion rands, or 27.5% of GDP, of which 901 billion rands is the tax revenue share. Total revenue is budgeted to rise to 1.2 trillion rands in 2015-16. Growth in tax revenue is thanks to steady improvements in compliance of South Africa's taxpayers, which is a cornerstone of the social compact on which our capacity to invest in development and social progress rests. We should never take this commitment of our taxpayers for granted. As part of this commitment, to ensure we spend taxpayers' money wisely and receive the best value for money, we use tax compliance as a determinant of good standing when deciding whether to award a government tender or not. Increasingly, it is being used by private enterprises as a check on business integrity and financial soundness. Tax clearance requests have increased to more than 600,000 a year, that is, requests to SARS. There is also corruption in this process. SARS has developed now an electronic mechanism for taxpayers to provide real-time, up-to-date and continuous tax status information to interested parties. In other words, if you apply for a tender and if you are about to be awarded a tender, the department can check with SARS electronically, are you tax compliant at that moment in time? The use of a unique one-time access PIN will significantly reduce the scope for fraud and abuse of paper-based tax clearance certificates. These changes will be implemented at the start of the next financial year. In addition, feedback on successful bidders will give SARS the ability to track those companies' compliance and income from government over the duration of the contract to ensure that they meet their tax obligations. In other words, once the departments have checked, that feedback will go to SARS to say we have awarded a tender of 10 million rands or 20 billion rands or whatever the case is. SARS will now follow up to say, have you paid the tax on the money that you've received from government? Speaking of tax compliance, allow me to use this opportunity to remind those of you who have not yet submitted your annual income tax returns that you have 4 weeks left to do so. By yesterday, just as a reminder to all of you, 3.4 million taxpayers have submitted their returns since the start of the tax season, a 24% increase over the last year. A growing number of taxpayers are submitting their returns using the latest mobile technology. Now, it's just not computers. Commissioner Mahashura tells me SARS now operates the 7th most popular free download app in South Africa. What of the adjustment appropriations that Cabinet has decided upon? Deputy Speaker, before turning to our spending plans for 2013 budget, allow me to comment briefly on the 2011-12 outcome and revised numbers for 2012-13. Spending from the National Revenue Fund last year amounted to 888 billion rands, or 5.7 billion rands less than the adjusted estimate. For the present year, the February budget provided for an appropriation of 969.4 billion rands. After taking into account the changes proposed in the Adjustment Appropriation Bill, expenditure this year will be 967.5 billion rands, or 9% more than the 2011-2012 outcome. Spending in the first 6 months amounts to 464.8 billion rands, or 48% of the revised estimate. This represents a commendable moderation in spending growth. I acknowledge the support of and thank my Cabinet colleagues and the provincial executives in ensuring greater expenditure discipline. A total of 3 billion rands that will not be spent in 2012-13 has been declared as savings by national departments. The main adjustments that have had to be made this year are for the higher than expected salary increases, amounting to 1.4 billion rands in national departments and 4 billion rands in provinces. The adjustments appropriation also provides for 1.5 billion rands in rollovers of expenditure commitments from last year, 461 billion rands to contribute to hosting the 2013 African Cup of Nations football tournament. Minister Mbalula, we better win that one. An additional 375 billion rands for environmental employment projects, 366 million rands for infrastructure in the health sector, 81 million rands to combat rhino poaching in the Kruger National Park, and 63 million rands for anti-piracy operations in the Mozambican Channel. Details of these and other adjustments are set out in the adjusted estimates of national expenditure. Deputy Speaker, our Constitution requires an equitable division of revenue between national, provincial, and local spheres of government, and sets out the principles that underlie this division. As in the past, the proposed division has benefited from advice of the Finance and Fiscal Commission and from deliberations of the Budget Council. The medium-term budget policy statement proposes a national appropriation of 1.05 trillion rands in 2013-14, 1.14 trillion rands in 2014-15, and 1.23 trillion rands in 2015-16, which translates into expenditure growth of about 8.4% or about 3% a year in real terms. Just under 10% of the total, or 98.6 billion rands next year, will be spent on debt service costs. Our budget framework includes a contingency reserve, which is 4 billion rands next year, 10 billion rands the year after, and 30 billion rands in 2015-16. This allows for unforeseeable claims on the fiscus, such as will arise from the recent floods in different parts of the country and future policy considerations. This leaves 949 billion rands to be allocated next year, rising to 1.1 trillion in 2015-16. The proposed division of revenue allocates 47% of our total available money to national departments, 44% to provinces, and 9% to local government over the MTF period. The requirements of education and health, as well as the cost of public service wage bill, largely determine the provincial share of additional allocations. Salary costs and infrastructure requirements are the main adjustments to the national votes. The equitable division of funds between provinces and between municipalities is determined in part by population numbers. The results of the 2011 census, which will be available later this month, I believe, will soon be available and will be taken into account in updating the distribution of resources in the 2013 budget and beyond. As far as local government is concerned, good progress has been made since 1994 in improving access to basic municipal services for the poor. The proposed budget framework provides for strong growth in national transfers to local government so that development objectives can be met. Transfers to municipalities will rise from 78 billion rands this year to over 100 billion rands in 2015-16. From reprioritization and drawdowns on the contingency reserve, a total of 12.3 billion rands is added to the local government budget framework over the next 3 years, including spending by national departments on behalf of municipalities. In addition, the Development Bank of Southern Africa is being repositioned to play a more focused role in lending to municipalities. The human settlements and public transport functions are being devolved to urban municipalities, and greater technical support will be provided in rural areas. Increased funding is proposed for the Integrated National Electrification Program, and projects to improve infrastructure maintenance and stem leakages from water and electricity will be supported. In line with the National Development Plan, we recognize that cities have to play a key role in growing the economy, creating employment, reducing inequality, promoting social cohesion, and fostering integration. Townships and informal settlements have to become centers of economic vitality, an opportunity for business and enterprise development. Discussions are currently underway with our metropolitan cities on an intensive support strategy to address spatial patterns that will exacerbate social inequality. This will include further investment in public transport systems, development of settlements closer to work opportunities, and greater support for small businesses. The challenge to mayors and councils is to ensure that their delivery machinery is ready for the transformation of our towns and cities. Our economic progress and social development will be largely determined by the pattern of urban development over the decades ahead. Alongside support for cities, we are strengthening allocations to rural municipalities for delivery of water, sanitation, and electricity. We also expect provincial governments, who are key role players in rural development, to accelerate the provision of agricultural services in these municipalities. As far as provinces are concerned, the total allocation to provinces next year will be 418 billion rands, rising to 478 billion rands in 2015-16. The increase to baseline from the contingency reserve and other revisions amounts to 38 billion rands over the 3 years. As in previous years, infrastructure investment for schools, clinics, hospitals, and roads is a key priority in provincial spending plans. Provinces are called on to modernize their supply chain management systems to deliver projects on time, at the right price, and of the required quality. We will channel more funding to provinces that adopt transparent systems and demonstrate their readiness to implement projects effectively. In addition to their equitable share, provinces are funded through a variety of conditional grants. Changes proposed to the provincial grant programs for the period ahead include the following. A further education and training colleges grant will be increased to cover the cost of the 2012 wage agreement. Additional funds will be allocated to the comprehensive HIV and AIDS grant to compensate for a reduction in donor funding and to allow for rising treatment numbers. Funds will be added to the Human Settlements Development Grant for upgrading informal settlements. Spending on provincial roads will continue to increase, and increased allocations will be made to the Community Library Services Grant. How do we improve the quality of spending is a challenge for all of us. I would like to share with the House the very decisive view that Cabinet has taken of the need to reinforce expenditure discipline in our present circumstances. Departments have been instructed to prepare spending plans for 2013 within their existing baselines, as I indicated earlier. New activities have to be funded through savings, reprioritization, and reducing waste. Honourable members, we are very aware that increased allocations for infrastructure are not enough. We also need to address the shortcomings in planning, procurement, and contract management that undermine the effective use of these funds. There will be changes in the way our infrastructure conditional grants are managed. Cash flows will be linked to actual project delivery. Let's repeat that. Cash flows will be linked to actual project delivery. You don't deliver projects, you don't get the cash. And technical support programs will be stepped up. We need to see substantial improvements in infrastructure management in many departments and municipalities if we are to succeed in building the capacity required for a faster growing economy and better living conditions for all. Although we still have much to do, I am sure that this House would want to join me in paying tribute to the many officials in all departments, in national and provincial treasuries, in municipal finance departments, in the Office of the Auditor General, in the Revenue Service, and in various oversight and accountability entities whose daily work contributes to the quality and reliability of the budget documentation and financial reports at our disposal. These are the building blocks of good governance and service delivery, and we will continue to work tirelessly to reinforce the financial disciplines on which this House depends. Now to the medium-term expenditure framework. Deputy Speaker, in drawing up our medium-term expenditure plans, we take into account not just the national appropriation, but also the spending of provinces, social security funds, and public entities. This is what we call a consolidated government expenditure. It amounts to 964 billion rands in 2011-12, and the revised estimate for the current financial year is just over R1 trillion, or just under one-third of the size of our economy, or GDP. The largest share of spending is taken up by the compensation of government employees, which has grown faster than any other category of spending over the past 4 years. The medium-term expenditure framework has to accommodate the carry-through costs of this year's wage settlement. This has largely been done through drawdowns on the contingency reserve. But our aim is to achieve a shift in the composition of spending over the period ahead towards infrastructure, investment in economic competitiveness, and education and health services. This requires continued discipline in administrative costs and consumption spending. The 3-year wage settlement provides for above-inflation increases in salaries, and in order to afford this, we will need to set specific 3-year targets for personnel numbers and remuneration costs. We need to see improvements in productivity and more effective use of existing staff establishments. This is an opportunity not just to achieve a better balance in the structure of spending, but also to strengthen the institutional coherence of government. It is an opportunity to reinforce accountability and build the capacity of the state as called for by the National Development Plan. About 65% of our consolidated expenditure comprises social services and investment in local government, housing, and community amenities, what we sometimes call the social wage. Expanding the social wage is one of the most significant advances we have made as a society since the dawn of political freedom. This is absolutely crucial for redressing the inequalities and underdevelopment which most of our people experience daily. Public spending has become substantially more redistributive and pro-poor. In the last decade, an expanding fiscal envelope has allowed a doubling of the social wage, rising capital budgets, growing social transfers, increased public employment, and improved public sector wages. The largest share of consolidated expenditure goes to the education function, which will spend 234 billion rands next year, including allocations for arts and culture, support and sport and recreation. In order to get our children off to the best possible start in life, we will continue to increase funding for the Grade R year, and the School Infrastructure Backlogs program will be stepped up. Healthcare accounts for 132 billion rands in next year's spending plans. Funding will be provided for an improved diagnostic test for TB, additional allocations for the HIV and AIDS program, and continued investment in hospitals and health infrastructure. Our longer-term phasing in the national health insurance will significantly broaden the social wage, giving effect to government's commitment to improving the country's health indicators through a better resourced, better managed, and fairer health system. Social protection spending is projected to be about 136 billion rands next year, comprising social assistance grants, unemployment insurance, road accident benefits, and various social development and welfare services. The number of grant beneficiaries is expected to rise to 17 million by 2015. The budget will include funding for increased employment of social workers and improved funding for non-governmental welfare organizations. We also are working on proposals for promoting household savings, reform of the retirement landscape, and broadening social security. The aim is to provide better incentives for preservation of savings and improved income security. We have received very useful comments from many South Africans on the proposals thus far and will continue to consult widely in taking these initiatives forward. Spending on local government, housing and water services will amount to 133 billion rands next year, budgeted to grow by 9% a year over the MTEF period. A number of households with access to clean water is now estimated at over 13 million, which is more than double the 1994 number. Over the period ahead, additional funding will continue to be provided for the expanded Public Works Program and the Community Work Program, which provide supplementary work opportunities at the local level. In the economic support functions, investment in transport infrastructure and services is the largest category, accounting for 80 billion rands next year and rising by 8.4% a year over the MTEF. Spending on rail rolling stock and signalling infrastructure will increase by nearly 20% a year. Fighting crime remains a budget priority and will account for 152 billion rands in spending next year, together with defense, justice, and prisons. Over the medium term, funds are reprioritized within police to support expanded detective and forensic capability. Our budget plans also include provisions for South Africa's leading role in the Square Kilometre Array Radio Telescope project, which is an international partnership that will attract some 20 billion rands in global funding over the long term. Deputy Speaker, I hereby submit, and these are the documents in front of me, the Medium-Term Budget Policy Statement 2012, and I table the adjusted estimates of national expenditure, the Adjustments Appropriation Bill 2012, the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill 2012, the Taxation Laws Amendment Bill 2012, and the Tax Administration Amendment Bill 2012. How boring. But that's our duty. As we conclude, Deputy Speaker and Mr. President, let's remind ourselves again. 20 years ago, in Ready to Govern, we said that we would honestly face up to the problems confronting our country. We said that these would not be solved overnight, and we recognized that our ultimate goals have to be transformed into effective and realizable programs in the short and medium term. The global economic slowdown and the domestic stresses we currently confront have presented formidable but not insurmountable challenges to our fiscal and budget framework. Our response to these challenges is set out in the Medium-Term Budget Policy Statement. It provides the financial plan for infrastructure investment, broadening of the social wage, investment in education, and support for economic competitiveness to be implemented over the period ahead. Deputy Speaker, I want to thank President Zuma for his constant and bold leadership, and President Motlanthe for his valued guidance. I am grateful for the support of the Ministers' Committee on the Budget, members of the Treasury Committee, Cabinet colleagues, premiers and provincial finance MECs during an important and challenging time in our country. My sincere appreciation to the following for their invaluable and constructive contributions: Mr. Mufamadi and Mr. Sogoni, Mr. De Beer and Mr. Chane, who chair the Standing and Select Committees on Finance and Appropriations. The Governor of the Reserve Bank, Ms. Marcus, who is in the gallery, and her team for a very supportive monetary policy. The Auditor General, Terence Nombembe, and his staff for their rigorous scrutiny of our public finances. Mr. Opa Makashula and the staff of the South African Revenue Service. They don't look 15 years old, but for their creative and valiant efforts to collect the revenue we need. To my colleague, Deputy Minister Nene, who has been a pillar of strength and always willing to share the burden in managing the complex issues we've had to deal with. Director General Lungisa Fuzile, who has provided a very strong, erudite and courageous leadership, and a dedicated and patriotic Treasury team, which has consistently done what is in the best interest of South Africans. Deputy Speaker, we still live in challenging and uncertain times. A year ago exactly, 25th of October 2011, I said, and I quote, "There are many opportunities for us to advance to our goal for a better life for all in South Africa. This is a time for united action, for greater urgency, and for an unconditional focus on those programs which will demonstrate to our people that we care and that we will change their lives for the better." End of quote. This is our collective message to all South Africans and the world. And this is for emphasis. The global economy, particularly the developed countries, will be in difficulty for some time to come. The South African economy, by comparison, remains resilient in the face of both global and domestic challenges. We are committed to taking strong measures to ensure value for money, increased savings, eliminating waste, and implementing more effective controls over personnel expenditure. There will be no additions to the overall spending levels. Public expenditure will remain at the level set in the 2012 budget. You have to clap for that one too. As South Africans, we need to dig deep into our reservoir of goodwill, ingenuity, and resilience to find new ways of implementing our plans, creating jobs, and generating inclusive growth. As government, we have a sustainable fiscal framework which balances short-term support for the economy with long-term fiscal consolidation. We have all committed as government to working within this framework. As a country, we face difficulties, but please, we are not in a terminal crisis. Let us set about proving the pessimists wrong, working together to fulfill our vision. So I was saying, let us prove the pessimists wrong. And we need to work together to fulfill our vision for a strong, prosperous, and united South Africa. Finally, I quote once again from the plan adopted by Cabinet, the National Development Plan. South Africa has the means, the goodwill, the people, and the resources to eliminate poverty and reduce inequality. It is within our grasp. But it will not happen unless we write a new story, a story of people, their relationships, their dreams, and their hopes for a better tomorrow. We want our children and young people to have a better life chance than we have. The capabilities that the country needs to enable citizens to thrive include a capable state, leadership from all sectors of society, and a pact for mutual sacrifice and trust. I thank you.
Well, there we have it. The medium-term budget policy statement for 2012 has been delivered. Let's get some reaction from our economists in studio. I think this time I'll go ladies first. Minister Gordhan was rather, well, let's say he mentioned the word South African resilience quite often.
Yes.
And he's very adamant that things are not as bad as what we might think.
Yes.
Do you agree?
To a certain extent, I do agree. But however, I think if we consider the third quarter in terms of the mining strikes and the impact that it will have on GDP, it might actually be worse than what we expect. If we look at our total exports, about 70% of exports is actually accounted for by mining and mining-related sort of products. So I anticipate a number which could be a lot weaker than what we expect right now. The number that's sort of going around is around 1.8 to 2%. So I think we could have a potential a bad number coming through there. But in terms of overall what he managed to do through the budget, he managed to say all the right things. He managed to surprise us positively with the fiscal deficit being a little bit less than what we expected. So I think overall it looks as if in terms of investor confidence and the sentiment towards the South African economy, things will ease a bit given what he did manage to do with the budget estimates.
I'll get your reaction in a second, but first let's cross to the steps where we have Asanda ready to get some reaction from the members.
I'll start you there. Okay. Well, the finance minister is done with his speech. First up, to get our reactions, we have Steve Swart from the ACDP, who seems to be a bit impressed with how the finance minister did. What exactly is it that impressed you, Steve?
Well, what was particularly impressive was that the budget deficit came in very slightly lower than was forecast at the beginning of the year. And this is good news. We were expecting, in the light of the global economic crisis and the domestic economic crisis, that the budget deficit would be higher. But it's come at 4.8%, which is to be welcomed because this has a positive impact on the debt of government going forward. The minister made it very clear that our debt consolidation package is on course, and this sends a very strong message to investors and credit ratings agencies.
The reprioritization and expenditure, how's that for you?
Well, that is also to be welcomed because there is not an increase in government expenditure beyond what was announced in February. The minister made it very clear that there will only be a reprioritization of funds and that he will be addressing corruption and irregular and wasteful expenditure to make sure that there is not an increase in government expenditure. That the ACDP welcomes.
Steve, thank you very much. That's Steve Swart from the ACDP. The first bit of our reactions, we'll go back to the studio and we'll come back to Parliament a bit later on for more reactions.
Adnan, let's just pick up on what the ACDP said. They're very happy with the fact that expenditure is not going to rise. And in fact, we've got the government saying that it forthrightly is confronting its difficulties. So those are two positive that we have here. It looks like reassurance is high on the agenda. But before I ask you the question, let's just recap what the minister did say about government confronting its difficulties head on.
In government, we are forthrightly confronting our difficulties. We assure our people that we will repair dysfunctional municipalities. We will try harder to connect book suppliers to schools. And we will work with business and labor to create decent living conditions in mining communities.
Well, did he convince you?
Not entirely. On the expenditure side, the projection is that, at least for the current fiscal year, that there won't be any increase in spending, yet within that, the expectation that we will spend more on wages and more on servicing the debt. I thus question whether, if we remain committed to some of the other spending priorities, especially on infrastructure, whether that expenditure target is in fact achievable. And if I can just say on infrastructure, the minister wasn't sufficient on, I think, the detail, both in terms of the actual projects, but especially in terms of how we will continue to fund those projects.
And if you factor in what Jalima said earlier,
well,
that growth might even be less than he thinks.
This, of course, brings into question the projections as far as revenue is concerned. 2.5% growth, although it was in line with our expectations, I think at this stage, given the kind of disruptions that we've seen in the mining sector, there is downside risk to that. And to the extent that that actually materializes, it brings into question the revenue projections. So I think both in terms of revenue and on the expenditure side, there are in fact more serious questions.
Well, there we have it. Our economists are not entirely convinced, despite a lot of big words from the minister. Let's go back now to the steps where Lucanio has the next reaction.
Gunther, thank you very much. With me right now is Dr. Peter Mulder, who is the leader of the Freedom Front Plus. Sir, good afternoon, and thanks so very much for joining us. Tell us your overall impression of the minister's speech.
Yes. Well, the deficit is up and the growth rate is down. That means all the indicators are moving in the wrong direction. Surely, if that was a patient, the alarm bells will go off and we need urgent action. And I do think the minister did try. I think he's brave in some of the things that he did, stopping waste, not trying to get more taxes, but really stopping the department, the government of spending more. Die groot vraag is of hy gaan slaag om die mors van geld te beperk, om kontrakte beter te beheer, want hy het al die maatreëls aangekondig, ons sal hom daarin baie sterk ondersteun om eerder daai kant vas te vat as om die belastingbetaler swaarder te laat kry.
What kind of support do you think you can lend to the minister for him to try and achieve his objectives?
Well, just the way I react at the moment to say, surely this is the benefit of South Africa. I was nervous that the ANC priorities might be more important than South Africa's priorities in this election year for them. And I think he said, no, South Africa is number first. We must save the economy because we're moving in the wrong direction. If we can support him, we are a bit negative that in the past these measures did not work and that spending just continued to spiral out of control. And he said, we're not going to do that. Let's help him to stop that in the budgets, in the parliament and in the committees. We'll do that, yeah.
All right, and then just finally, your overall impression then, are you satisfied?
Well, it's a difficult one. We'll have to see. I think, as I said, he was brave in doing what he did. And broadly, I'm satisfied that he's realistic. I was worried that he will not be realistic about this situation in South Africa because we are in trouble. If the numbers go down what he predicted, none of those numbers really came through. And that is realistic that he accept that, and he said we must do something about that.
All right. Dr. Mulder, thank you, sir, for your time.
Thank you very much.
Gunther, that was Dr. Peter Mulder, who's the leader of the Freedom Front Plus. He told us here that the minister is very brave. He's setting some objectives and that they are very satisfied with the fact that the minister is looking to cut spending drastically from what it currently is. Gunther, I'll cross over to back to you in studio, and then we should see you a little bit later when we have got more reaction from down here.
Thank you very much, Lucanio. And let's just carry on with that Mr. Mulder said there about the numbers going down. In the speech, the outlook for the economy is perhaps even a bit more rosy than we might have expected. 3% for 2013, 4.1% for 2015. Let's take a look at what he said, and then we'll get some reaction from our economists again.
Deputy Speaker, the outlook for the South African economy, on the other hand, is as follows. As I indicated earlier, we expect growth of about 2.5% instead of the 2.7%, and down from just over 3% in 2011. Gross fixed capital formation will increase by about 5% this year, mainly driven by public sector capital spending. Business confidence remains weak, and private sector investment growth is subdued. Consumer price inflation for September 2012 was 5.5%. Headline inflation is expected to stay within the 3 to 6% inflation target band for a period, but could go over it as well. Well,
there we have it. Adnan, if you listen to what he said and you compare South Africa to its peers, do you think he's on the right track?
Well, I should firstly say that 2.5%, I think, for the current year is achievable. The question is on the projections in the outer years. I think 4.1% for 2015 is questionable given the kind of global environment that we face. But how that stacks up to our peers is unfortunately not a particularly rosy picture. Even compared to sub-Saharan Africa, 2.5% growth is less than half of what we expect the region to average over the next couple of years. And certainly compared to the BRIC economies, that kind of growth rate is actually quite poor.
Jamila, it sounds to me like, well, in the past we had Zimbabwe's that dragged to SADC, now it's South Africa.
Yes. Sorry, can you repeat your question?
When we look at the region,
yes.
Economic growth has been dragged down in the past by the unfortunate events in Zimbabwe.
Yes.
But this time around, South Africa seems to be leading that.
Yes, it's very unfortunate. I mean, if you look at South Africa, we should be in line with our neighbors. We should be in line with sub-Saharan Africa. We have positive population growth. We have the resources. Growth really should be looking a lot better than what it is at the moment. But unfortunately, we face a lot of capacity constraints. We face a declining manufacturing industry. We have an economy which is very much services oriented, unlike the average emerging market economy, which is really driven by manufacturing.
Let's talk about that for a short while. When we look after that clip we just played and we read on a little bit, he says that infrastructure spend and increased electricity generation are going to be core to achieving the growth targets. I'm sure the man on the street is going to tell you Eskom is not contributing anything, he's just taking stuff out of our pocket.
Well, it again raises the question of how we actually continue to fund these projects. And I don't think that is a question that we necessarily have cohesion over. So more discussion is certainly needed on that front. Eskom is a special case because we've clearly identified it as an area where there has been underinvestment over a number of years, and we certainly need to catch up. But I think more broadly, the question of how we continue to fund these infrastructure projects is one that still remains to be answered.
Well, whilst that question hangs in the air, let's go back to the steps where Sanda has her next guest.
Well, Gunther, the Congress of the People has made a lot of talk about discipline in the fiscus. I now have with me Nick Koronov from COPE to talk to us a bit. Nick, do you think that your idea of discipline in the fiscus has gotten through to the Finance Minister?
Well, absolutely, yes. I think there was a little bit of expediency since 2008. He has clearly hit the brakes today and restore fiscal discipline, and we're happy about that. That will also assist a little bit in restoring business confidence, and that's exactly what we needed this time.
What's your idea on how the minister's panned out spending, reprioritizing public expenditure?
Well, it is the importance of that is that they will go now to every department, reprioritize, and make sure that they cut programs that's not necessary, defer where they don't need certain programs, and save where they can save. If they're not going to do that, if the departments and the provinces and local municipality and all the cabinet colleagues not going to support Pravin Gordhan on his statement today, we are in trouble.
Mr. Koronov, thank you very much. That's Nick Koronov from the Congress of the People saying the Finance Minister is on the right track, putting those brakes on expenditure. Gunther, on expenditure. Gunther.
Thank you, Asanda. Well, it might be on the right track as far as cutting back on expenditure is concerned, Jamila, but he's also a bit concerned about the fact that fiscal stimulus has not worked as planned. Let's just quickly have a listen to what he had to say about that. Okay. And then I can get your reaction on it.
Size of the fiscal stimulus, reinforced by accommodative monetary policy, South Africa's economic recovery has been tepid. Investment, trade, employment growth have remained hesitant. Part of the explanation is the weakness of the global recovery. But we also have to look at ourselves. We have to ask what reforms we can implement to give greater impetus to investment, business development, and job creation. As COSATU's General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi recently said, and I quote, "We want investment opportunities to flow in our direction. We don't want our country to be presented as a chaotic place where there is no rule of law, where dog eats dog, where the mode of operation is survival of the fittest." End of quote. End of quote. End of quote.
International investment community will be convinced by that after he said that's what we want and this is how we're going to do it, do you think they'll believe it?
I think to a certain extent they will be convinced. I think the very positive thing that has come out of this budget is the fiscal deficit number. It's a positive surprise. It will restore some semblance of investor confidence. And just on the fiscal stimulus, I think it's a question of exactly how you stimulate the economy. And what we have seen in South Africa is a lot of social spending, a lot of grants and a lot of spending on wages, what we call current expenditure, not exactly the kind of spending that it has a dynamic impact on growth.
So we're talking about investment spend here, and that is necessary. And he didn't mention anything in his speech to give us an update.
Absolutely correct. But if I can just go back to a point that was made by my colleagues, it's not just a question of convincing foreign investors. I think the minister needs to start by actually convincing South Africans and South African investors, because what has been quite weak through this recovery is local private sector investment. And there's an issue around confidence, and I still don't think that we have seen enough to sufficiently restore the kind of confidence that would allow the private sector to rise up to the challenge of boosting investment expenditure.
Thank you for that. Let's go to Lucanio now, who's got the UDM with him.
Gunther, thank you very much. With me is Mr. Nqaba. He is the Deputy Secretary General of the United Democratic Movement. Mr. Nqaba, thank you very much for joining us, and thanks for your time. Your overall impression, sir, of the budget delivered by the Minister a few minutes ago?
Well, I think the first thing that we need to talk about is that we're very happy about the fact that the ministers managed to keep a healthy fiscal framework under very difficult circumstances. But we want to caution that that's going to be very difficult to sustain if the department still allows government departments to actually waste money, 5 billion rands on entertainment, and when it allows departments to actually divert resources that are intended for something else into private individuals' projects. The other issue that's very important is the decision to increase or expand trade with Africa and into Africa, because in the past we've been very good at exporting principles of democracy and good governance to Africa without necessarily taking advantage of opportunities that arise, economic opportunities in particular. The other issue that's very important is that government has actually taken a decision to link cash flows to effective infrastructure delivery in provinces. That's very important. I think those steps are very critical. The other issue that's very important that we hold very dear as the United Democratic Movement is the issue and the focus on providing greater support to municipalities and rural municipalities in particular. Yes.
All right. And then, as a member of Parliament, I mean, having listened to the minister, now, what responsibility will you then take as a member of Parliament to say, look, we need to keep this government clean. We need to keep this government to the promises made by the minister today. What role do you think you can add in that regard?
I think the most important part that we can play is try to inculcate a culture where citizens are actually able to hold public reps accountable, and the government in particular accountable for the delivery of service to the people. We need to try to be more effective and mobilize structures so that we can help government rather than at times we want to always oppose. But I think it's important that we try to work with government because this is our country at the end of the day.
All right. Mr. Ngwangwa, thank you very much for your time, so we really do appreciate it. Gunther, it's back to you in studio. That was Mr. Nqaba from the United Democratic Movement giving us his take on the minister's speech. Over to you in studio, Gunther.
Thanks, Lucanio. Adnan, I just want to get back to that point about evidence of expenditure being shifted from current expenditure to investment expenditure. Mm-hmm. Do you see the evidence?
Well, in terms of the infrastructure spend numbers that the minister presented, it's largely unchanged from what we saw earlier in the year with the release of the budget. Around 840 odd billion to be spent over the next 3 years. And still, not much increase over those baseline figures. Not much detail in terms of how we would actually ensure that a large part of that will actually come to fruition. Remember, one of the key problems that was outlined in the budget earlier in the year is a quite high percent of underspend coming through, especially in those areas where we need service delivery, which is as far as local government and provincial government is concerned.
Jamila, at the same time, he told us that government is beginning to dip into the contingency reserve to help finance civil servant salaries. That surely brings off alarm bells.
Yeah, no, that's definitely not a good sign at all. It's something that should be raising alarm bells, something that we should keep an eye on, because I think he did manage to keep the overall numbers looking good, but the devil is in the detail.
Well, let's go back to Asanda, who's got Thabo Mufamadi, chair of the Finance Portfolio Committee, with let's hear what he has to say.
Well, the ANC has taken a lot of heat about the state of the economy. With me right now is the chairperson of the Finance Committee in Parliament, Mr. Thabo Mufamadi. Is Treasury still hitting the right notes when it comes to the ANC's priorities?
Of course, I am convinced that they are still within what our priorities are all about. Fighting crime, social spending, particularly on health and education. But most importantly, to continue to breathe new life into economic growth, infrastructure spending. Today's budget, what we're seeing is that, one, we must do more with what we have. It's not an incremental budget. It's a budget that is almost what it was in February, but most importantly that there are savings that have been realized within that budget. And there's no compromise on infrastructure spending, which is very, very critical for both economic growth and social development in our country. So from where we're sitting, the budget still talks to our priorities and key manifesto priorities for that matter: health, education, and crime fighting.
In the run-up to this mini-budget, there's been questions about leadership in government. Are you sure that Treasury is now given the right leadership when we're talking about the state of our economy?
I think what has emerged today is that the budget proposals before us into the next 3 years dispels that myth that there's no leadership or there's a leadership crisis in the country. We can see a government that has taken firm stand on what needs to happen, even including the issues of labor relations, how we should actually coordinate our efforts between all organs of civil society, labor, business, and government itself. And the issue of the mining industry, yes, of course, has dented investor confidence. We can't shy away from that. In fact, even the Secretary General or the General Secretary of COSATU has alluded to this fact, that we cannot continue to posture or create an image that suggests that we are a country in a crisis. And precisely because of that, leadership is a collective effort. It requires both government, labor, and business. But on the issue of labor relations, it is more a matter between labor and business. If there's a leadership crisis, that crisis will be found within the two. We can only facilitate as government, and the ANC has been very, very much concerned. And to that extent, we've been engaging with the Tripartite Alliance to find a solution on this particular matter. And you can also remember that not long ago, the President convened a summit wherein a social compact was actually adopted, which begins to say what are the key critical areas that all of us must begin to focus on to give leadership in society.
Mr. Mufamadi, thank you very much for speaking to us. That's Mr. Thabo Mufamadi from the ANC. We'll hear more views from opposition parties, their take on the midterm budget policy statement right here. For now, let's go to Gunta.
Thank you very much, Asanda. Adnan, Can I just have your closing remarks, please? Especially, I'd like to know about more of what you wanted to see in this budget as opposed to what was delivered.
Well, firstly, this is a mini budget which is primarily geared towards providing us with an update on the fiscal projections. But still, having said that, I think given the kind of negative environment that South Africans have been living through over the last few months, there was the expectation that there would be a little bit more detail this time around to give us the kind of reassurance that we need. To some extent, there was certainly an attempt to do that, but I think more could perhaps have been done. In terms of the numbers, I still think that the government and the minister was a bit thin on the detail. Now, some of the projections that we have, especially for subsequent years, remain questionable, and the jury is still out.
Jamila?
Yes, I think South Africa in South Africa we have a very efficient Treasury, Minister of Finance, SARS, but the rest of the departments tend to not to be in line with that. So I think that's more a reflection of what we normally see. We normally see Treasury coming in and giving an overall good impression, almost glossing over the faults in the other areas. I think what we got in terms of the numbers is enough to kind of allay the most immediate fears, but I think that the long-term problem still remains, and we should not be complacent in just the problems that confront South Africa.
Thank you for your time, to both of you.
Thank you.